Ulan West Underground is located near the village of Ulan in central west New South Wales, about 45 kilometres northeast of Mudgee, and is 100% owned and managed by Glencore.
So our presentation is going to outline a brief overview of the Ulan coal mine complex, then talk about the in situ characterisation around airborne dust in the seam, look at our experience and learnings, and then I'm going to hand over to Jarod to talk about the longwall journey with automation and a couple of the topics, and then provide an example of one of our investigations into one of the exceedances we had last year, and then summarise at the end. Now, I'm pleased to say that Ulan generally, particularly Ulan West, is in a fortunate position with the seam that we mine, and we haven't contributed this year to the statistics of exceedances. We've had an exceedance-free year. Glencore's coal assets are stationed, situated along the east coast of Australia, in Queensland and New South Wales, and include 4 underground mines, 1 in Queensland, 3 in New South Wales. The Ulan Coal Mines complex in the Western Coalfields is owned and operated 100% by Glencore and comprises Ulan No. 3 underground and Ulan West operations, and the coal handling and treatment facilities as part of the Ulan surface operations. Ulan West is the most recent underground mine in the complex and lies to the west of Ulan Underground. The key feature of Ulan West is the longwall panel lengths from 5 to 8 kilometres, and this enables 12 to 24 months of longwall production between longwall relocations. The mine operates 2 development units to support the longwall operation on a 7-day roster, with longwall operations currently on a 5-day equivalent roster. Options to extend the current life of mine from 2032 for a further 7 to 10 years are currently in progress, and you'll see the mine plan status that's indicated there. Longwall, the current longwall 7, has 1,900 metres retreat remaining, having retreated 5,200 metres since August 2022, and Main Gate 8, our next panel, is currently driving the install road for the longwall. Main Gate 9 has recently commenced and has completed to 9 cut-through, with another 78 pillars to develop. Year to date, Ulan West is on target to produce 8.5 million ROM tonne, which will be our best year. It helps when you don't have a longwall relocation. Now to look at the characterisation for the seam for airborne dust. And I guess when I started in the industry in 1981 and started my course, I was taught that coal miners' pneumoconiosis, or more commonly known as black lung, was a thing of the past. But as we know, history has a habit of repeating itself, and in the recent years in Queensland, the issue re-emerged. Since that time, a small number of cases have been identified in New South Wales. So this renewed a focus on airborne dust management, not just underground, but across the whole industry and beyond. We know that this is not a disease that shows itself immediately, and this challenges us to see it as a real and imminent threat. It is, however, personal and real to those who have been diagnosed. I recently came across a mate. It was at one of those venues that we catch up far too often as you get on later in life. It was at a memorial wake for a mate of mine, and there was a deputy there that I hadn't seen for 20 years. He was diagnosed with black lung in 2015 and had a significant impact on his life. It shortened his working career and could possibly shorten his life. So we have that duty to ensure that we minimise the exposure to airborne dust as much as possible. So the Ulan seam varies in thickness across the lease from 9+ metres to the north and 7 metres to the south. It's generally very consistent, comprising interbedded stone and dull bands and dull coal plies with minor claystone bands. It's the dull coal plies and stone bands that provide the higher ash and subsequently the higher silica content. The mining section is actually the lowest ash profile, and whilst intentional from a coal qualities perspective, it also provides the lowest silica profile. Looking at the profile, though, silica as a percentage of ash across the lease, we do get a bit of a heat map, and it shows that silica increases to the west and to the south of the mining lease. So as we extract out behind the longwalls, we see higher respirable quartz results, which then makes a higher focus required to keep people's attention to the controls. We do the information that's up there enables focus areas to target maintenance and effectiveness of airborne dust controls and workforce training and awareness. We also have to deal with localised lensing, sometimes faulting and intrusions, and these had a significant impact on some of the results last year. You can just see in the photos there, some of that lensing that's apparent in the seam. Compared to other underground coal mines, we still are in a very fortunate position. We aren't cutting large stone bands within the seam, and we don't have a pure stone roof or floor. So from the experience, 10 years of mining operations at Ulan, we've got quite a database of relevant information on airborne dust exposure. Typical of the risk management regime of today, we have an established systems approach to airborne dust management. We have a management plan and procedures underpinned by risk assessment. We've got controls identified through the risk assessment and baseline data, and we've got directed and work order driven verification of controls. And I refer back to what Jason said about being proactive. That verification of controls is very important to keep people's eye on the prize, that the controls are being maintained, they're effective, and we have a system of records that shows us that they are working prior to getting a result back that says they aren't. Such an approach does not rule out human error. Where the hazard of airborne dust generation and exposure is not considered, identified or controlled. Regular communication, experiential-based training and refreshers are utilised to minimise this. The base expectation for every worker is that prior to undertaking a task, their pre-task hazard ID does consider airborne dust as a hazard and what controls are necessary for the task they're doing. Experience has shown us that our exceedances that we've reported in the past, the small number that tasks, they're basically task driven. People haven't considered the impacts of airborne dust being generated or what they're exposed to. So learnings, we have pretty much got in control our inhalable and respirable, total respirable dust. They're not a big issue. It's the respirable quartz that is the issue, and given the increasing profile through the longwall panels, it's mainly our longwall that sees that exposure risk. Other exposures come through that task base I spoke of earlier. Generally, our exceedances will be pinned down to inadequate hazard identification or the breakdown or erosion of controls. When we look at our seg monitoring, the longwall, we have an exposure to respirable quartz. Our process tasks such as removing bat bags, structure removal, maintenance do have some impact. All controls are important, we've found over time, and must be given equal priority. The other seg group that comes up from time to time is the use of cementitious-based products such as spraying onto stoppings and grouting tendons. Basically, the task set up there has been found to be the critical factor. In development, we have generally good results. We have very low counts of dust. So whilst the effort may not appear to be maintained in those areas, we just try and focus the crews on making sure those controls are being maintained and effective, and that the work order driven verification of that is complied with. So for our control strategies, I spoke just of development, making sure that we maintain those controls as effective. We made sure that there's continuous awareness of airborne dust as a hazard, and particularly on our MB650s, we make sure that the curtains are in good condition. With cementitious-based products, we've moved to wet application where we can, and where we still have to dry mix, then our task set up, we've introduced an authority to grout or an authority to spray permit, of which there's an examples on the screen, so that there is verification prior to starting the task. Now I'm going to hand over to Jarod to talk about the longwall.
Thanks, Murray. So I'll just go through a bit of history on the longwall automation since we started longwall mining at Ulan West, and then I'll go in a bit of detail around the real-time dust monitors that we've recently installed. So at Ulan West, we first started longwall mining in 2014, and at the time, through a training experience, we went all manual control with both the leading and tail drum. We did that for a couple of months and then went into the traditional bi-die sequence with the OEM automation. So that's the traditional extractor current on the tail drum and manually driving the lead drum. So that from there in 2018, we went to pitch steer, and that allowed us to be out of the dust from the roof support. So you'd teach it one run, and then it would copy that on the other way. And then in 2020 we went to floor steer, and in 2023 we went to floor steer plus we control roof supports from the surface. So I'll go into a bit more detail. Sorry, the screen's going down here, but from day one, the Ulan West longwall's been set up with surface management in mind. So these couple of slides down the bottom here, we had cameras on every roof support, we had inclinometers on every roof support, we had the personal proximity in the contract with Komatsu. This video here is from 2014, where we done a pilot trial on the Ulan West mini build, where we had cheap cameras on each roof support, and we controlled the shearer remotely in a control room to prove the technology and to basically prove the technology, and that's the goal that we wanted to get to. So longwall 1 to 3 was the traditional OEM automation. So there's a video up here just from YouTube, just as an example, but you can be exposed to dust if you're controlling the tail drum where you have to, or if you're controlling roof supports from downwind of that lead drum. It's prone to error, and you do have to have manual intervention from time to time, and you're relying on other means or other controls like dust suppression. The standard OEM automation is an uncontrolled feedback loop, and that's where the errors come from. And you require limits like pan control. So longwall 4 to 6, we went to pitch steer, and the main trigger for that was dust exposure. The problems with those traditional OEM methods, the extractor current or FX2, fixed extraction, was you had to control the lead drum in both directions, and you had floor oscillations, so poor horizon control. So we went to pitch steer, and that was based on a combination of Glencore and Komatsu specifications. We found that with pitch steer on the tail drum, the oscillations were removed, and that meant we could use recorded roof on the lead drum. So the results from that were the operators were out of the dust, out of the roof support dust when they didn't have to control the lead drum. The floor horizon was greatly improved, and that improved our dilution. And there was no more humps on the face as bad as what it was with the FX2 or the extractor current methods. So in longwall 6, we introduced a concept called floor steer. Now, The problems with pitch steer was the floor horizon, the roof horizon were not linked. So we had issues where we could pinch out. It required people to be close to the shearer to still operate it with the remote. And there were issues with recorded roof where if the pan's pushed over and changed altitude, the recorded roof would have that error in it. So we introduced the floor steer and we had a surface control room on the surface, which our crews called the shearing shed. That was a Glencore internal program PLC based control for the shearer. The shearer is basically set up like a plough. So the lead drum is fixed all the time and we just change horizon with the tail drum. The other key difference with most other people that are doing floor steer or pitch steer is the gate end cutout method was developed at Ulan West. And the results from that was we have minimal interaction with the shearer, so we reduce that exposure. We eliminate pinching out. We go to that observe, plan and execute process, and the gate ends were managed from the surface always. Going to floor steer, we had one person in the shearing shed, but there was no overall increase to manning. So in Longwall 7, in 2023, we went to controlling the roof supports from the surface, so we added that to the shearing shed. So this allowed us to fix roof support errors in the automation in by of the shearer, so we didn't have to stop the shearer to fix those issues. We had the ability to cut multiple shears unmanned. We turned the OEM, the Komatsu proximity detection system on, and that allowed us to take or not have the remote underground and remove those people from being close to the shearer. And we went to that observe, plan and execute it was still in play. And all through doing that, we still only have one person in the shearing shed. So the learnings out of that were, we found that you need rapid development of the user interfaces to suit our particular application. So there's a few other mines within Glencore and elsewhere that are on that same journey, and we found that their setup wouldn't suit our conditions. So we found that you need rapid deployment of those user interfaces in the shearing shed. So this is a bit of an explanation on the floor steer process loop. So first of all, down the bottom, we observe the coal seam. So we have a face mapper. He walks along every fifth shield and maps the face and enters that into the roof support control system. That information then comes to the surface on a screen. The shearing shed operators look at the horizon, the pan angles, and they plan the next two shears of what the shearer is going to do on the floor. So that then goes to the execute phase, and that goes down to the shearer for the next two shears. What we're working on is to reduce that face mapper and do the observation from the surface as well. So that's mapping from the surface, and there's a few little photos there where we're doing that recognition of the penny band in our case, and we've also been playing around with tools where it's like a digital ruler. So we've got cameras on every roof support. You can build up a big array of images, and then you can measure with a digital ruler where the seam is. Go through a few more other dust mitigation strategies. So we did improve the scrubber arrangement in Longwall 7 with another set of equipment. So these videos just show it was the first time we extracted dust from the BSL hood. So these are just a few videos where we tested this at the factory. We also went to homotropal ventilation in the longwall to remove the dust from the 3 trippers we were running, so no airborne contaminants will be coming in by to the longwall from the conveyor, or off the transfers of the trippers. You can see the ventilation arrangement on the left-hand side, your right. Real-time dust monitors. So we've had real-time dust monitors installed for 3 years, and I'll just go through a few examples here. This is the last 18 months of sampling. So from longwall 6, then we had the longwall move, and then into longwall 7. So you can see we have dust monitors at the longwall tag board, and that's to pick up any dust from vehicles. We have a dust monitor at 100 metres out by the face, and that's to detect any belt dust coming into the longwall. We have a dust monitor at the BSL, and it's there to pick up any crusher or BSL transfer dust. And then we have another dust monitor at the main gate, which basically tells us the exposure to anyone on the face in by of the main gate. So a few results here. This is just a snapshot where we can see these spikes, and that was when we were stone dusting, so no one in the panel, but from the weekends. We also have an increase there where we went back and had a look and at the time and investigated, and that was actually from 2 sources. Was where we stone dusted, and the stone dust went on the monorail before we done a service attraction. So the lessons there were we now stone dust before we bring the monorail through, so the dust doesn't sit on the monorail itself. We also have not exceedances, but an increase as we come up to pulling out the trippers. What we've found recently too is the scrapers and the sprays at those trippers, even though it's on homotropical, the belt was drying out by the time it got down to the boot, and it's coming off the return. So in 2023 this year, we ratified a dust tarp. So that's based on levels at the main gate. We have triggers and follow this tarp. We basically have the 3 levels, which is yellow, which is investigate the dust source. We have an orange trigger, which automatically slows the shearer down, and that forces an investigation to start. It slows it down to 8 metres a minute. And then red is our trigger to stop and find the source of the dust. There's a couple of examples there of the tarp itself and just some displays that we run. Let's go through a few sampling results. So this is all the highest results year on year from in the longwall from all 3 types of dust sampling. So you can see overlaid on top of that just where we've introduced different features and our year on year improvements. So I'll go to this next slide here, and this slide here is every single dust sample or hygiene monitoring result we've had in the longwall and our results. So we had 3 quartz exceedances last year, and we've had none in 2023 yet. I'll hand back over to Murray.
So just before I go on to this example, just back onto the homotropical ventilation, I think a lot of you, well, for the underground personnel in the room, you'd be saying, well, homotropical ventilation, that's been around for a while. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Why weren't we doing it? Well, it has to do with those 3 tripper drives that have non-explosion protected drives on them and the interpretation of what a return is. But I'd have to say that's the subject of a separate presentation, because I might be rather challenging to the regulator on how they determine a return. So this is an example of what we do with an investigation into an exceedance, and I'm not going to explain the content because there's quite a lot of detail. I just want to more talk about the process and the use of the data that we're able to get from the longwall now. Secondly, we don't want to wait for an exceedance because, as you know, we get a hygiene sample actually Coalserve has been doing very well lately, but 1 week or so after the sample's taken, and unless you've got the data from the participants in that sample, memories are very short term. So we now look at gathering that data on the day, irrespective of what results we're about to receive. Secondly, if we do get an amber result, we investigate that so that we understand the issues and see what we can do and make sure we don't prevent an exceedance. And so far this year, whilst we've come very close, we've had a couple of .05s on silica, we haven't actually had a notifiable exceedance. So first of all, we described the incident. In this case, this was a remote operator carrying the remote on the face and doing face mapping duties for some of the shift. So that's just basically what happened.
Yeah, so this was prior to going to roof support control on the surface.
Yeah, yes.
So still carrying.
So this was Longwall 6 in 2022, actually in March. It was the first of 3 exceedances for the Longwall last year. We take heed of what the CMTS report says, particularly from the technician, in terms of observations and also any comments on the individuals that were being undertaken the monitoring. Then we look at the results and see if we can draw any conclusions. In this case, we've got one red result, which is the fire exceedance, but we have a person performing the same role at the top and above the red exceedance that had a very close result, and we look at what similarities in role did those 2 people perform. The resample, which is required, was some of the lowest results we'd received. We build a timeline of the person's activity across the shift and look at what percentage on production, process and other tasks, so that we understand what sort of exposure to the main dust generator or exposure on the face that person had. And then we look at what this verification of controls. So we use an airborne dust checklist pre-shift as part of the pre-shift checks on the longwall before we start cutting to make sure all controls are operational to a standard. And you can see on that checklist we've got a traffic light system, green, amber and red. So if any of those red boxes get ticked, we're not permitted to start production until that's rectified. Talking about the prox tag, this is just a short segment of the shears, part of the shears on that shift, and the prox tag line, which you see is on the bottom side of that shear graph. That just tells us that the person's position was complying with our system of positioning people on the face. Yeah. And in this case, all people were complying with their positioning.
I'll probably add to that. Before we actually had the proximity detection system used to inhibit, we had it in monitoring only.
Yes.
Purely for this reason, where we could see where people were. The shearing shed could see where people were, but it also has the side benefit of if you have an exceedance or a close to, you can go back and see exactly where people were standing and make sure they're compliant to your system.
Yeah, the prox system has expanded from the monitoring the position to now inhibiting functions on the face, and we're about to extend that further. So we've now got our horizon on the face, and we look at whether we've been in horizon or out of horizon, and in this case there were no issues with the horizon. They're basically all in the green zone. And then a little bit busy, but we then look at the shear graph and we look at the dust monitoring results, and there were 2 spikes above on the total respirable, which tends to say we had a very short duration of exposure and it didn't influence the quartz result that we received. And again, some observations on those results that we received both for the resample and the original exceedance, and we make any conclusions from that.
The real-time dust was, this example was prior to when we were slowing the shearer down and had the dust tarp in play as well.
Yeah, a lot of the actions have resulted out of those 3 exceedance investigations last year that we've now seen in Longwall 7 and seen a successful reduction in exposure. We apply the typical 5Y investigation to determine cause and effects. I'll just flick through those ones. And then we look at what the root cause was, what other causal factors are available and what actions we take. I don't need people to read them, that's just an investigation process. But then we had a following exceedance in June 2022, and that's a picture of the shearing shed, by the way, that's on that slide. But we investigated using the same data, and we actually found, in this case, we had similar conclusions. So really, what that's resulted in is in Longwall 7, we've actually implemented further physical controls, which is part of the inhibit on the prox tags, the slowing down the shear on the tarp. We also placed a limit of 7 shears because of people being on the face, and that was to rotate people and minimise their exposure that way, because we did determine out of those investigations that the production levels were a contributing factor. We had 18,000 tonnes in the March exceedance in a shift, and so obviously the more tonnes, the more dust potential and exposure. And we have extended our remote operation, as Jarod has just explained, in Longwall 7.
Yeah, so we only need someone on the face to map from the main gate to tailgate.
So just to summarise, we had before my time, I've been at Ulan West for 5.5 years, so the longwall was ordered and in operation before I arrived. But from my view, the longwall system has been well spec'd from the start. It was spec'd with the capacity to go to remote operation. So it's now not an aftermarket fit, it's now not a retro impossible to fit situation where you can't do some of the things we're doing. It was well thought out and had a vision to succeed eventually to this. And whilst airborne dust has been a driver of that, obviously the consistency and efficiency that we're seeing is also a benefit. It is continual work in progress. People's awareness and recognition of the hazard do wane over time. And because of this issue of the disease or the condition being latent and it's not seen immediately, we have to make it personal. We have to get people to realise that it is an impact. And the way I phrase it to the workforce is, if you can see visible dust in front of you in your breathing zone, then you're in the wrong spot. And if you still see it, then we've got the wrong. There's controls that need to be implemented or maintained. And reducing airborne dust is a pursuit because, as we know, cutting coal, we're going to have dust generated somewhere. So reducing exposure can be a reality, such as our longwall automation. So I'll leave you with a final thought, and I thank you very much for your attention.